Because by the way, mate, one thing we have to get into to start out with is this. So remember, in our minds, we're at the semi-finals now. We did all the rest of MSI. We did the Rumble stage with the group. Here's my problem with MSI as a tournament. I know there was only going to be one obviously good series, which was the final. And if you're lucky, you got the G2 T1 could have been better and it could have been a great. So you could have two series. Every other fan seems to actually have been deluded enough to think both semi-finals would be great. I can't even believe this going in because I couldn't believe this. So here's the thing. On the EG side, it's not that people were picking EG to win, but they were just like, they took that one T1 win and fucking hell, they milked it, Monte. I even heard, here's what I hate. I hate when people do the Mott and Bailey approach, where basically what you do is you take a really provocative stance. The provocative stance goes like this. EG's already got capable players. These NA players are as good as the Jensens and the Doublelift's of the world. They're getting experience and they can compete now. We're in the game. Now, here's how you know they didn't ever believe that, any of the people involved. Because the second they lost, and people like me pointed out, you do know you actually won 1 out of 13 games, 12 games or whatever. And on top of, no, it was 13, I think. 1 out of 12 games, or 13, and on top of that, that was a throw. Like, then they suddenly go, whoop, and they go back to this position that goes, well, they're just rookies getting experience, and besides, they did sweep the minor regions. It's like, whoa! You see how crazy the fucking mismatch between those two statements is. Like,
let me. This is. I'm just going to explain the Mott and Bailey to people as it's a logical fallacy basically, and it's a rhetorical trick that people use. And what a Mott and Bailey is that it's an old type of fortress, which is it's like on a hill, and it has a wooden ring around it, like a wooden wall, and then on the inside it has a separate. Then there's like space between that wall where they're like houses and shit or other buildings. And then there's like a fortress at the center of it. So when you say Mott and Bailey, basically you have your fake defense, your first defense around the outside. And when that is breached, you retreat into the inner castle. And that's the Bailey that you sit in. And so what he's saying is that their initial defense of these players was, you know, a weak defense, and then they retreated to a different, stronger defense that doesn't actually logically track with what they were initially saying.
Like, think about it logically. If their position is just, well, you know, they did what they could and they're still young, but you know what? They beat all the minor regions, then you would have said they have 0 chance against RNG, they'll get shit stomped, and why does anyone even care? In fact, you'd even say, what a miracle to win the game against T1. But as we see, they just want to keep veering between the two positions. Because the AG one I thought was pathetic. I couldn't believe how many fans really thought they had any world in which they were going to win games. Like, that was never going to happen, even if RNG didn't win this tournament. And then if we switch to the G2 one, that's almost as bad. Because here's the problem. I'm totally, by the way, down for the idea when G2 themselves had the super team. I used to do this. You remember when we did the episode where we were talking about when they were going to play like Damwon or whatever in the semi-finals? I remember even saying, look, I have to say Damwon's the better team, but I don't pick against Perks, for example, because I've just seen him do too many amazing things. This G2 team's done too many amazing things. Like, I can't pick against them because they've got the track record and the character where they could win this game even if they're an underdog. Here's what I don't get, Monte. First of all, there were people trying to conflate that storyline with that G2 lineup from 3 years ago and being like, well, G2 in the past have beaten T1 in semi-finals. First of all, it was only Faker in that lineup, and G2 itself has 2 players. But then the other thing is this. The actual hopium and copium of believing G2 were the favourite, I can't even rationalise that. And I would have told you that before the series even began. Because if people don't know, on the desks, right, it was like, I think Dagda had it as like 3-2 for G2 winning the series. Emily Rand had T1 winning 3-2. By the way, that's how far we've gone with the brainwashing when Emily Rand has to say 3-2 for T1. 3-2, love, really. You see, you're picking the right team, but even you're giving the concession, like, be fucking close, though, I want it to get past Flackhead. Sort it out. And then they had Dracos come in, and yes, Monte, you're all going to say now the stupid thing everyone's going to say. We just did it for the show, didn't he? Did it for drama reaction. Dracos came in and said 3-0 G2. And here's the problem: if you actually listen to what he said and you look what he said on Twitter, he didn't do it as a joke. He actually meant it. He even, I think on the podcast, I think Z Euphoria had it as like 55-45 for G2. It's like, look, it's not that you get wrong, by the way. Predictions technically don't matter, but in this particular case, the prediction has to match your analysis. You don't do the analysis like this, Monte. Well, FaZe Clan should win the major, then they've got a better map pool. I think actually they'll neutralise Simple. And at the end, lol, Marvy 2-0, 16-0 every time. Like, that would be stupid. That doesn't work as a prediction. I can be wrong with my prediction, but my prediction must be connected to my analysis. So I don't even know. part of me thinks some of these people do believe these predictions, but I also think they're just selling a false bill of goods to the broadcast. Like, what are we doing here? Why are we being silly?
I think what's strange about this for me is that if the situation with G2 had been reversed, where they were very good in their second round robin leading into the playoffs, and they were getting those wins, as opposed to the first round robin kind of getting figured out and then falling off pretty heavily as soon as Ornn got banned, basically, and a lot of these kind of top lane matchups that were kind of suspect when they happened, but were still pulling out wins rather inexplicably. As soon as that went away and they were doing very poorly on the second round robin heading into the playoffs, it seemed pretty obvious that their strategy had been solved. And you would have to basically believe that they were going to come up with an entirely new bag of tricks. But unfortunately, we had already seen their bag of tricks. Their bag of tricks was can't play Gwen, will play Vladimir and Riven as hopeful counters to the Gwen.
They had less tricks by the end of that phase, right? They ran out of answers.
Exactly. We saw the tricks, right? We saw them. And so, like, do you really believe that they have suddenly solved a Gwen counter pick in the top side that will make them able to play through Broken Blade? Because the alternative logic is that, okay, so they can't play through Broken Blade. It's not like Broken Blade was inting. He just wasn't a factor in their wins, which is very different than the way they've been winning this for the majority of this year, when Caps was very underwhelming during the spring split. So they can't do what they were doing earlier, which is play through Broken Blade. Caps had some insane performances, so they were playing through Caps, and he was carrying. But the other option is, when you are playing world-class teams, you can't have a single threat in a best of 5. Like, that doesn't work. Even some of the best teams in the world who have tried that, as in the Uzi teams mostly, were not able to like really win titles based off of that strategy.
They won very few titles. Yeah,
it's super hard to do that, guys. You can be good, but you can't be great at an international. That's not a tournament winning strategy. And so that means that by default, you must believe that they are going to play through 2 rookies, Flacket and Targamas, in the bot lane or Caps. And they have to win through these factors. And they had been winning through those factors, but the competition was ratcheted up, and it's a best of 5 where they've seen the tricks already, so you're not going to be able to resort to those. And so it seemed, look, I thought it was going to be 3-1. I thought T1 would like into game and like Caps would pop off or both. Like, G2's not a bad team by any means. They're just not in this meta. Let me rephrase. In this meta, they are not a complete team, because when Gwen becomes the ascendant pick and you as a team cannot play this Gwen, you have a lot of fucking problems.
By the way, a spoiler, as we found in the final, there are no Gwen counters. But we'll get to that. That delicious razor cake's coming for the final. Because as I've always said, I do hate it, and I know coaches, it drives them mad. When players are like, no, I don't play the new champion that's OP, but I have the counters. It's like, fuck your mythical counters. I will wait to see them in the game. Spoiler, have you got any examples of anyone else doing these counters, or are they purely hypothetical in a scrim in your mind? Because they nearly always are, spoiler. So here's one thing. I agree also with the characterization. Here's why it doesn't even work narratively, Monte, because as you say, here's the logic they were using. Well, G2 started off amazing on that streak. What happened to them since? Ignore that. Oh, but T1, they started off a bit dodgy. How did it end? Oh, ignore that they went like 5 out of their last 6, and if anything, they were the ones peaking. Give me a fucking break. This is amateur hour shit, boys. Those storylines don't make sense. Like, one of them can't be applied to the other one, because one goes only the first part counts, and then the latter part doesn't count. Except which is the more relevant part going into the playoffs. As Monte says, if anything, you know who the team is at the end of the Rumble phase. You don't know at the beginning. They're still figuring it out. They're trying new shit out on the patch, etc. Like, you know at the end though. Like, actually, that's the biggest joke of all. It's like I also knew in the series, by the way, there's no way G2's winning when they just drafted like away from Caps immediately. Like, what the fuck?
Did you like the
I know.
So here's the thing, guys. When you come into the first game of the series with Caps, who had been doing like 27% or something of their team's damage, like up until that point, he was the clear carry, and he was, we've all seen those amazing like Yasuo plays that he had, really, really impressive stuff from Caps. And when their game plan is as follows: don't play through Caps, right? Play towards the bottom side of the map.
To defeat us, yeah.
Yeah, so and like really actively put a lot of jungle pressure down there, try and make plays on that side of the map. What this says, guys, is that in their scrims. So either you can believe that they didn't know this about their wins, which, I mean, they're not stupid, right?
Oh, no.
And Dylan Falco's not stupid. So what this tells you, if we read between the lines, is that their scrims of playing through mid were going very badly. And the logical conclusion they reached from their practice was that the best way to win was to play through the bottom side. Now, why would they reach this conclusion? I think it's probably likely that their bot duo was doing very badly in lane during scrims. And so they felt they needed help because when they played through mid lane, they would die in bot and then lose the game. Yes. So even though the ceiling of that strategy of not playing through caps, or of playing through caps was higher. If you play through caps, you can beat these good teams. We've seen it, right? Apparently, by the end, it just wasn't reliable. Again, we've discussed you can't play through Broken Blade because he doesn't have the champion pool on this patch in order to make that effective. Therefore, even though it has a lower ceiling, it has a higher floor, and so we have to play through the bot lane. That would be my reading of their conclusions about how scrims were going and why we saw what we did in these games.
But I actually found that semi-final to just be pretty shit too. It's not even, by the way, this is the most underwhelming part. It's not even like T1 was playing flawless League of Legends. There was plenty of openings in those games. In fact, they even played fairly aggressively. It's just that actually G2, by the way, they looked like a team that has had their shit pushed in scrims, probably by both, if I had to guess, by both RNG and T1. They looked like one of those teams that you sometimes get where this is one of the reasons why no one believes in NA Week 2 at Worlds. That's when the team have played so many games and they've won 1 out of 12 that in their brain it's like, how do we even win one of these? Like, that was a scrim, even, for fuck's sake, we can't win one of them. It's like, that's when people are just like, that's why people don't get it. As weird as it sounds, it would actually be better for League in terms of if you want parity between the regions, that they're either super familiar, you play all the time, so you're forced to level up in this sense, or you don't. You just come for a weekend tournament and you don't scrim the team. I actually think sort of the middle ground essentially creates the worst scenario for the Western team. It's like you start figuring out there's a meta you're not like quite good at. Start trying to get good at it, but you've got like half a week to do it, and then start playing the games immediately. Meanwhile, they come in, they've got their sense of how to play because they're already coming from the best regions. They tweak a couple of things, check out what you're doing in scrims, ban these two things, and then you're just shit out of luck when you get into the real match, and every idiot fan's going, what a moron, how they drafted this here. It's like, the draft's nearly always based on what was going on in the scrims, especially MSI, remember, because there's so few teams, it's going to make the draft conclusions even crazier. I mean, at least in this case, some of you could practice against the Koreans if you had the actual like hookups for the scrims. It's even worse when it's in like NA or something, because then it's just like you're in this fucking black box scrim environment and we're just all guessing from the outside, aren't we? So you might even be right and we're the idiots. Who knows?
Yeah, and there were a lot of teams actually in Korea. So, Team Liquid and 100 Thieves are there on boot camps right now, plus all of the Korean teams and Chinese teams and Taiwanese teams that might have been scrimming during these periods. So you actually do, when you're in Asia, have a lot of non-tournament teams that you can scrim against, because other people are also going to be boot camping there or are just close enough to the servers that enough teams are going to be active, because teams want to be in that environment scrimming. It's an incredible advantage because some of the best teams in the world are going to be there, and they're going to want scrim opponents that aren't in the tournament. So you can take advantage of that and get yourself some really good practice if you're smart about how you do it. So, I mean, as good as G2 was at times during this event, and I think I think Caps showed why he's such a fucking world-class player. It was, and as good as Targamas and Flackett have been as new players to the game, I think it was an unreasonable expectation for them to beat T1 in this semifinal because they're too new. It's the same shit that happened last year with T1 at Worlds. Like, this was a really young roster that contained a lot, at the time, like rookie players, right?
And so they played 2 full splits with the same lineup.
Yeah, and they hadn't played 2 full splits with a solid lineup. So it made sense that they weren't necessarily going to win Worlds that year. Right? The experience actually does fucking matter a lot in this game. And you combine that with the fact that a lot of these players hadn't had much stage experience, and especially audience experience. And I think that a lot of the young players, in spite of not having significant crowd experience, did very well in this event. And that includes players on EG as well. I don't understand why G2 wasn't held to the same kind of standard that EG was, which is that EG has a bunch of new players. We need to give them time. This is a valuable experience for them. Nobody's ever boot camped in Korea before because of the pandemic. If you're a new player, they've never, have scrimmed or practiced against some of these top level teams. It's an excellent experience that they'll learn from. And I don't think that either G2 or EG's performance is particularly embarrassing if you consider all of the factors that went in there. Now, if Team Liquid had come to this event and done as poorly as EG with their, in terms of record, with the veteran players that they had, I think that is very disappointing, which also says that Team Liquid's inability to even make this tournament is even more disappointing.
Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.